morning from Beijing and welcome to the CGTN's special coverage of the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation or APEC meetings. I'm Li Dongning. Well, it's the last day of this year's APEC Economic Leaders meeting in San Francisco. APEC is a grouping of 21 member economies founded in 1989 to boost free trade and investment among economies bordering the Pacific Rim. And over the week, leaders, ministers and also officials held discussions on APEC's work across a wide range of policy areas, including trade, investment, the digital economy, clean energy and climate. And now, together with our teams in San Francisco and Washington, D.C., we'll bring you the latest updates on the last day of the gathering, and also we'll dive deep into regional economic cooperation. So stay tuned with us. And for the latest, let's bring in Xu Xinchen in San Francisco. Hello there, Xinchen. Well, first bring us up to date on the Chinese President Xi Jinping's agenda there.
Absolutely, Dongning. So today marks the last day for the week-long APEC 2023 Economic Leaders meeting here in San Francisco, California. And local time in the morning, the leaders of the 22 APEC economies will meet again for a retreat, and the leaders are expected to give short speeches to summarize their achievements over the past half week or so. So there are a lot of things to expect from Chinese President Xi Jinping, and especially after the highly anticipated meeting between Chinese President Xi Jinping with his U.S. counterparts, President Joe Biden. So during the past 3 days, there have a lot of things happened, and I need to bring up my notes. So President Xi has reiterated that the Cold War sentiment is not good for modern economy to grow. And right now, the economy should focus on becoming greener, fairer, and have a focusing on digitalization of markets. And countries should work together towards no discriminations on technological competition. And China-US decoupling is no good for anyone. Small yard, high fences is in no one's interest. And right here, this is the handout for President Xi's written speech during the CEO summit, which wrapped up on Thursday, and the title, Meeting Challenges with the Unity of Purpose to Write a New Chapter for Asia-Pacific Cooperation. It reaches every corner here in the venue of Moscone Center in downtown San Francisco. It's a handout in the media center as well as the main venue for the CEO summit. And President Xi Jinping has a really busy schedule during his almost 4 days visit here in San Francisco. And on Thursday, the president also met with Mexico, Peru, Fiji, Brunei, and Japan. And of course, next year will mark the 10th anniversary of the China-Latin America Forum, and trade volume between the two worlds, China and Latin America, surpassed $4.5 trillion US. Speaking of that, and Peru is of course going to host APEC 2024 next year. And in addition, the meeting with Fiji, Brunei, and Japan, Chinese President Xi Jinping reiterated several times on cooperation. And President Xi's remarks have been making headlines here in San Francisco, especially on the world is big enough for the two superpowers of today's world, China and US, to succeed. Dongning.
Well, very tight schedule for the Chinese president indeed. Thank you very much, Xu Xinchen, reporting from San Francisco. And now let's bring in Hendrik Brandy, also in San Francisco. Hendrik, give us a preview of what to expect from today's APEC Economic Leaders Retreat.
Well, that economic leaders retreat is scheduled to begin any moment now. Obviously, a major kind of a crowning point for this entire week of the APEC summit. Lots of economic leaders in the 21 member economies will be gathering here. President Xi of China, of course, U.S. President Joe Biden, and leaders of the other 19 member economies to try to flesh out some of the discussions they've had over the past couple of days. The theme of this retreat will be creating a resilient and sustainable future for all. The goal of the retreat is to build a more interconnected, innovative, and inclusive APEC region. They're just tying some of the themes that they've been emphasizing all week together, trying to tie these countries together as much as they possibly can. Now, earlier this morning, just moments ago, in fact, U.S. President Biden and President Lopez Obrador of Mexico held a one-on-one session. We've spoken a lot over the past couple of days about bilateral sessions between top leaders of various countries and regions, and this is another example of that. The two leaders met here a short while ago. Again, topic A, maybe the most important issue that they're dealing with here is the whole question of combating drug trafficking as much as possible. The U.S. and Mexico, of course, have lots of migration and immigration issues to talk about, and the drugs are certainly a component of that. The U.S., of course, made an agreement with China the other day on fentanyl and on cutting down on the precursor chemicals of fentanyl that flow into the United States. Mexico is very concerned about that issue as well, along with, as I said, the larger issues of drug trafficking and immigration, and major migration flows still going from Mexico to the United States. So those two countries have quite a history when it comes to that. So the two presidents wrapping up their meetings one-on-one. Then comes this summit, or actually the final set of meetings, the retreat of the economic leaders, where again they'll try to tie together many of the themes that they've been focusing on all week as this APEC summit begins to come to a close today. Lots has gone on here. Lots of private sessions have happened between leaders. This one will be out in the open, where they'll all be sharing their final thoughts before all the delegations prepare to go home. Back to you.
Indeed. Well, the one-on-one meeting between Chinese president and U.S. president will certainly have some impacts on the APEC meeting following up. So we'll keep our observation on that. Thank you very much, Hendricks and Brandy, reporting from San Francisco. And now let's hand things over to our studio in San Francisco to get some early expectations ahead of the APEC leaders meeting. Hello there, Mike.
Thanks, Li Dongding. Great to visit with you. It is the last day of APEC, as our colleagues have just been mentioning. Of course, the meetings between Chinese President Xi Jinping and U.S. President Joe Biden, that's been a large focus. And if that's any indication, Beijing-Washington ties appear to be on the mend. For a breakdown of the past week at APEC and the numerous breakthroughs, I'm joined by my colleagues Anna Naidu and Mark New sitting here with us. Been covering it all this week. It's been a busy, they're like 16-hour days for all of us. Yeah. Key takeaways for you, Anna?
You know, one of the words we heard most often this week, Mike, was the word inclusiveness, rather. It's about expanding economies, more investment, getting more people involved, getting more people to work. That was a theme that we heard from President Xi on several occasions. Look, he said right at the beginning, you know, recognizing that there are differences between the United States and China, he said, there's plenty of space on planet Earth. You remember those remarks that he made just before his formal meeting with President Biden. Plenty of space on planet Earth for both sides to prosper and to succeed. That does not belie the fact that there are serious problems. And I think fundamental to that is the way each country views the other. The United States sees China as a competitor, as a rival. China doesn't see it that way. You know, China doesn't want to engage in any kind of zero-sum game and says, you know, we don't pose any kind of threat to the United States. And I think, you know, one of the other important things that happened this week was President Xi's dinner with the top business leaders here in San Francisco. I mean, some of the biggest names in American business were there. Elon Musk was there, Tim Cook of Apple was there, Albert Bourla of Pfizer was there, Lawrence Fink, BlackRock. These are major players in the American economy. And this was their first chance to get a sense of where President Xi is going. You know, how is China going to engage with the business community, where that's going to go, what's the future? I mean, the underlying message throughout the week is China is now open for business.
And Mark, you've got the unique perspective in that you live here, and it was fun. I was talking to a good buddy of mine who's lived in the San Francisco Bay Area for decades, and he was like, oh, they shut down the Bay Bridge for 4 hours. There's been protests about the Middle East, and people are using it as a venue to do that. So many of the roads around here shut down. I was talking to a business person last night saying, you know, it's just killing our business. But the other side of that is that's the short term. It's kind of a nuisance. It'll be over after today. Long term, though, I was in Chinatown the other night, and they were saying, look, the trade tensions have absolutely killed us. We love having the tourists from China come to Chinatown. we've lost that. And I think on a more granular scale, the impact of this frigid relationship between these two nations is being felt all over the place, and I think you must see that in the Silicon Valley as well.
Yeah, I think so, exactly. Walking around with the gates up everywhere, the walls surrounding, and the business is worried about, their thoughts that, our drivers, our delivery food. One woman said that 70% is delivery business. So the short-term pain and the meetings and the board all complaining about it, they have a long-term vision. They know it's going to cause short-term pain to the residents, but they feel like this is a chance to showcase their city and bring in tourists again. They want it, and flights are going to be increasing. Shanghai's direct flights to Shanghai are going to be starting very soon. So they really see it as a long-term. And one of the big goals when I talk to the Bay Area Council is that the hope is that, these delegates will meet with various tech leaders, especially innovation, and potentially, set up shops here, establish small, units here or offices again, which they used to be thriving with until the pandemic and the trade war happened, and that pretty much shut off. So that's really their long-term goal, to bring them in. And what better way to attract them to come here through technology? As you mentioned, right behind there, we were able to try out Meta Quest 3 VR headsets, which are incredible. Google has a display right here talking about AI and how it can detect eye problems early on. So really a chance to feature and mingle and hobnob and make deals about partnerships and potentially also opening up places here. And AI, of course, a big issue, which was talked about with the US and China too.
You forgot to mention that Google even has a display here where they're providing coffee, which you need when you're putting in 16-hour days. On the other thing, I think we always think, leader to leader, and we think business a lot of time because it was trade tensions and stuff. But getting back to Chinatown, I was talking to Rick Kimberly, who's from Iowa, and of course, there was that famous trip to Muscatine by President Xi Jinping many, many, many years ago. And he said that President Xi sat on this couch in his house, and his wife wanted him to get rid of this couch for forever. But the tourism, again, Chinese tourists want to come and see the couch where Xi sat. They want to get their picture taken there. So now they've kind of moved it to the basement. But he was also talking about, missing that. And I think, there was all this talk about decoupling, which has become de-risking. The fact of the matter is, this relationship between these two countries is so intertwined and so important from a tourism standpoint, people-to-people exchanges, the pandas, all of it. And I think that the one thing that I'm hearing from so many people here is kind of just this optimism that finally the two leaders sat down, they talked. It was constructive. Not all the issues are going to be resolved in 4 hours, but at least it's moving in the right direction.
Yeah, one of the things that was pretty evident when we listened to President Xi, especially when he talked to the business leaders, was that he struck a very optimistic note when he was talking to these leaders on relations with the United States. And that is a note which actually runs counter to prevailing sentiment on Capitol Hill. Where there's almost bipartisan consensus that China needs to be countered.
Yes.
This is something which I guess they will have to reconcile, the two sides, in the days ahead. You mentioned the protest that took place here in San Francisco against the conflict in Ukraine, against the conflict in Gaza as well. President Xi, I think, very astutely pointed out that this city, the host city, was where the United Nations Charter was signed in 1945, I think it was. And he said, look, we need to get back to the principles and purposes of that charter. Made that very clear that, that international law should be paramount in this conflict. And some of the other things that we heard, especially when he spoke to the business leaders. I mean, he received 3 standing ovations, by the way, when he walked into that. And he said, China will never pursue a policy of hegemony or, impose its will on others.
Yeah. You said in Washington the belief system is countered. It's so interesting. You go to China and they say it's contained. They want them, it seems like the United States wants to contain China, how it's perceived both ways. Yesterday I was talking to the Trade Minister Juan Carlos Matthews from Peru, and this is another piece of this. We're talking about the U.S. and China, but this is 21 different economies here gathered. And he was talking about the fact that, Peru's kind of hedged its bets. It's doing a lot of trade within Latin America, probably does about a third there, about a third with the United States, and a third in Asia, which of course is China is a large part of that. And he was saying, the other economies are looking at this too, with and rejoicing, because you want to maintain these friendly relations with both China and the United States. Nobody wants to pick sides. They want this done as well. And I think we tend to forget that the ripple effect is global.
That's right. I've talked to the reporters around here covering from Spain and Papua New Guinea. I'm surprised, what is the interest here? And it's pretty much the main focus would shift to, we want to see actually what the U.S. and China are going to do, because stability there helps us out in our business too. So that was the main theme, which surprised me. Yeah.
And so, Anand, as we leave here, what are you going to be looking for in the weeks, months ahead? I mean, obviously it's moving in the right direction. There's still a lot of stuff that needs to be worked out, but at least from a military to military standpoint, those are now rejiggered. They were kind of, which is very important, because you do have these kind of episodes.
Right. There was a huge agenda, Mike. If you look at all the issues that they had to address, I mean, I think even with the best will in the world, they were not going to address everything. There were probably more than a dozen major issues that the two sides had to address. You mentioned the two things that we did see some agreement on. That's military to military. That's very important, that the top brass in each other's military continue to talk to each other. That hasn't been happening for the past year. There have been tensions in that particular aspect of the relationship, but I think they have some agreement that, okay, we'll reopen these lines of communication, etc. And then cooperation on narcotics. The United States is very concerned about fentanyl starter chemicals getting into Mexico, where they're manufactured into drugs at labs in Mexico, then brought into the United States, where it's created a huge problem here, a social problem, a health problem, addiction in this country. So that was something, I think, that two major achievements there.
And Mark, the leader's also talking about supply chain issues and green energy, clean energy. Those were also on the agenda here as well.
Those were, and also tariffs did get mentioned in the talks with Raimondo and Chinese Commerce Minister to discuss what they can do to sort of reduce those Trump-era tariffs and the additional ones that were on with semiconductors, and they have agreed to at least have further meetings on that in the first quarter of next year. Another issue, artificial intelligence, that was an agreement where they decided to have high-level talks on that. Both sides have actually been ahead of the curve. China in August being the first country to put restrictions on generative AI, and Biden administration executive order at the end of October trying to set guidelines and have companies with the powerful AI tools actually report on tests to the government. So trying to get ahead of the curve. They're not known for being technologically savvy, as we've seen in those congressional hearings, but both countries deciding that you can't go it alone, because AI tools are going to be used everywhere around the world. So if you just in your little bubble, it's not going to work.
Gentlemen, always great picking your brains. So much interest and knowledge at this table. And Li Dongning, we're going to send it back to you in Beijing.
Thank you very much, Mike, and Mark, and Anand as well. Well, the meeting between Xi Jinping and Joe Biden has captured the most attention over this APEC Economic Leaders Week. So now let's get more details from my colleague Asya Namda in Washington, D.C. Hello there, Asya.
Dongning, good to see you. Clearly, as these APEC meetings wrap up, one big question is, how will China-U.S. relations move forward? Chinese President Xi Jinping and U.S. President Joe Biden obviously agreed on some issues, but were unable to reach consensus on some of the most thorniest, long-standing sticking points. CGTN's Nathan King joins us live from Washington. Nathan, no major breakthroughs, as we've been talking about, but certainly these meetings set the groundwork to get the relationship back on track, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, I'm hearing one word that I don't often hear in Washington when it comes to US-China relations at the moment, which is basically optimism. They thought that this summit, a lot of the policymakers here, the White House, some in Congress, think tanks, think this meeting went a lot better than it could have done. Yes, there weren't huge amounts of deliverables, as they call them here, diplomatically, although the restoration of military-to-military cooperation and talking at the top level is very important, as is the fentanyl precursor chemical crackdown. It is hard to overestimate what a hot-button political issue that is, because of the opioid crisis here. And there's been finger-pointing unfairly at China, but China does have these precursor chemicals, and the fact that public authorities reacted so quickly in China to what was discussed in San Francisco has really gone down well here. But you're absolutely right. The handshakes, the warm words, all have to be backed up by actions here. And actions have been very different from words, especially when it comes to semiconductors, control of tech. And remember, we are going into an election year here where China is a political football that both parties like to kick around. And the room for maneuver in the Biden White House, especially when it comes to trade and tariffs, is not as wide as perhaps has been let on. So we'll have to wait and see.
And Nathan, we heard from colleagues who are covering the story in San Francisco. President Xi got a number of standing ovations from CEOs and business leaders. What does that tell us? Did these business leaders hear what they wanted to hear to invest in China?
Again, some optimism, especially that Xi Jinping is there in the room saying we're open for business. There's been a lot of worry from American businesses, not just because of rhetoric here in Washington, but some of the rules in China that they find a little bit difficult to interpret. But I tell you, the atmosphere of Xi Jinping being in that room has resonated across the business community. The question is, will it translate into action? And again, you know, businesses are pragmatic. They follow the political lead. That lead seems to be given in San Francisco this week. We'll wait and see. What is off the agenda is this whole idea of decoupling. Even de-risking is a word you don't hear much. It's more about managed competition and creating the rules of the road. You know, I'm glad the fantasy of decoupling and de-risking has slightly gone away, because never have we seen two major economies so intertwined in the 20th and 21st century. And the mutual dependence, profit, and, you know, to use the Chinese phrase, win-win scenarios have been beneficial for both countries in terms of businesses, employment, and development. So more of that real level-headed thinking is needed. But as you know, the US has its own industrial policy, as does China. It's about managing the differences. The fact that the US's new technological controls, even though quite rightly Beijing have criticized them, are not as strong as many feared they would be. The fact that there are loopholes and there are also wide exceptions is the unwritten headline that you don't see published here in the media. But that has led to some in Beijing and Western businesses to have a sigh of relief, because, you know, even though people would like to manufacture chips in the US, chip companies, they also know that China is their biggest and most profitable market. So they don't want to cut their nose off to spite their face, as the old English phrase goes. And I think these warm words, this idea of putting relations back on track, has done a lot for that. And just to get some face time with President Xi, perhaps ask some probing questions about how he feels about where policy goes, that's priceless in terms of business confidence going forward.
All right, Nathan King, thank you so much. Now, taken together, China and the U.S. produce more than 40% of the world's goods and services. Although relations have been strained, they're still doing business together, in fact, at record levels. Owen Fairclough with that part of the story.
Appetite for commodities such as soybeans. After a record 2022, US soybean exports had dropped off somewhat, partly due to competition from Brazil. But last week, China made its single biggest purchase of soybeans for 3 months. Good timing for US officials visiting China's International Import Expo.
China is a good market for U.S. agriculture products. It's our top market. We think it can be even better. We see great growth potential here.
But there are unresolved trade tensions hanging over from former President Donald Trump. He imposed duties on hundreds of billions of dollars of Chinese imports after accusing Beijing of unfair trade practices. China retaliated with tariffs on a smaller scale before the two sides reached a deal for Beijing to import more US goods to redress a trade imbalance, partly reflected in those agricultural exports. But under the Biden administration, diplomatic relations sank amid unresolved trade arguments before both sides reconciled, though Washington has maintained many of the Trump-era tariffs. Yet the US government's own accountants have previously warned that these kinds of tariffs backfire by reducing household income. China has expressed its concern over US sanctions against Chinese companies, two-way investment restrictions, export controls, and tariffs against Beijing, asking the US to respond with concrete actions. Owen Fairclough, CGTN, Washington.
Well, for more on the importance of this bilateral relationship, let me turn to Nathan Mahboubi. He's the director of the Penn Project on the Future of U.S.-China Relations at University of Pennsylvania. Nathan, welcome to the program. You know this relationship well. You know China well. You speak Mandarin fluently and just recently came back from a trip to China. I want to get to that in a moment. But talking, of course, is always a positive step when you're talking about the world's two largest economies. The fact that these discussions in such a high-profile setting happen is a measure of success on its own. But I got to ask you whether you believe it will change the trajectory of U.S.-China relations in long term.
Yeah, that's a great question. I really want to underscore the point that you just suggested and that Nathan King suggested earlier, that this meeting in many ways went about as well as the political environment could permit it to go. And I understand why many people, probably on both sides and both governments, are relatively pleased with how the meeting went. But we also need to be thinking about those more fundamental, deep-seated drivers that have brought the U.S. and China into a more confrontational relationship, and whether a meeting like this, however well it went in the particular context of this moment, can change those dynamics. And I think for that, there's a reason to be skeptical. The meeting did result in a few well-reported, relatively high-profile agreements on military-to-military exchange and on the fentanyl supply, but there's a lot of other issues that are bedeviling the relationship. And it's clear that they made much progress on those issues. And so that, I think, is one of the reasons why we might be cautious in thinking that there's some fundamental shift in this more confrontational relationship that we've seen emerge in the past few years.
Yeah, not many details about disputes like tariffs, tech restrictions, export controls. Are these issues something that they just may have to agree to disagree on, or is this something that you think may come down the road now that the dialogue or lines of communications at least have reopened?
You know, what the Biden administration clearly has been trying to push forward, and the Chinese government seems to be starting to accept, is this idea that the overall framework going forward will be one of a deeply competitive relationship that still managed well, that has certain guardrails. That's the theoretical construct that the Biden administration has been suggesting. If that construct is workable, if the Chinese agree to it, then the question will be, what are the issues that fall within the bucket of this is a deeply competitive relationship, and what are the issues that fall within the buckets of these are the things we're being careful about? And the particular things you listed, I tend to think still fall under the bucket of competitive relationship. But maybe, depends on exactly how that calibration the two governments decide they want to set, whether those kinds of issues will be things they can make headway on, or whether they just stay within the realm of this is what makes this a very deeply competitive relationship going forward.
And these two men, these two countries, obviously there's a lot of issues they do not see eye to eye on. But one thing that at least became abundantly clear to many people around the world, including someone who's still learning a lot about China-U.S. relations, is the fact that these two men do not want to see conflict between their two countries.
I think absolutely that is very clear. I think that has always been clear, but perhaps their attention to the possibility of conflict has been focused recently because they saw how bad the relationship was going. I'm sure that the fact that there's all these other conflicts popping up around the world right now, including in Ukraine, including in Israel-Palestine, that also has an impact on the way they are thinking about whether or not it makes any degree of sense for these two countries to have real conflict with one another. So that is part of the managing the relationship well part of the equation that I think both governments are very, very clear-sighted about right now. But of course, I think for those of us like myself who have had a long history of engaging with China, simply avoiding outright conflict may not be all we want to see out of this relationship. Of course, avoiding outright conflict is a positive thing. But if that's all we're getting out of the relationship, then I think there's a lot that's left there that is very sad to lose.
And Nathan, I want to get back now to your trip to China recently. I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, it was your first trip back since the COVID-19 pandemic. You wrote eloquently about the importance of people-to-people exchanges. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, this is the issue that I have staked out the most public positions myself of the importance, especially of scholarly exchange. As a legal scholar, I think it's incredibly important for my legal scholarship community to have in-person exchange once again. Other scholarly communities, I think that's just as important, if not more so, and also people exchange generally. I think it was good that Xi Jinping's presentation at this dinner organized by the National Committee of U.S.-China Relations ended up focusing on people-to-people exchange, was, as I understand it, one of the friendliest versions of the speech that he could have delivered. And my hope is that that sends a very strong signal throughout the Chinese governmental system that the very, very top leader has endorsed a robust return to scholarly and people-to-people exchange. And if that message is heard, then all these different obstacles that have arisen over the past few years to that kind of exchange, hopefully, will diminish very quickly.
I will leave it on that positive note. Nathan Mahboubi, always a pleasure. Thank you so much. Now back to Dongning in Beijing.
Thank you very much, Ase, in Washington, D.C. Now, for more discussion here, Li Yong, Chief Researcher at the DNC think tank, and Ina Tangen, Senior Fellow at the Taipei Institute, are joining us in the studio. Welcome to our special coverage, gentlemen. Well, first of all, of course, about the President Xi and President Biden's meeting, very significant, probably the most significant diplomatic meeting in this year. After the Bali meeting, a year has passed. They have engaged in another very important discussion about bilateral ties. So I'd like to get your view on the key messages sent out from the meeting. First of all, Mr. Li, what stood out for you?
I think basically the 5 pillars being stated, described, and defined during the top leaders meeting, and that is very important. I think those 5 pillars are very important in terms of the future trajectory of the bilateral relations. If the two countries cannot, probably Ina will agree with me, they cannot recognize the importance of the 5 pillars, we're not really going to get to the point where the bilateral relations will be stable, healthy, and developing.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's a lot about attitude. So on the U.S. side, you have this instance, it's still zero sum. All right, so it's, the thinking is, well, if I get, you lose. If you win, I lose.
But Biden actually sent out a message of no conflicts between the two countries.
Yeah, but Xi Jinping is talking about opportunities, about win-win, about avoiding conflicts. So what
the
is...
ocean is big enough.
The ocean is big enough. And a very positive message.
Biden was kind of somewhere in the middle, and he was talking, it's still very much zero sum and reflected in how they were doing it, but also this thing, managed conflicts. That means that you anticipate that there are going to be conflicts, and also defensiveness. So very, very, very different ideas about it. So I think if you're going to have real progress going forward, I don't know how you feel about this, it has to be a change in attitude, a recognition that the world is in fact multipolar, and that there has to be a way to get along.
Yes, I agree with Ina's analysis. I think there needs to be a kind of a recognition between the nature of competition and the possible conflict as a result of this competition, because competition, if not healthy.
Well,
it is going to be, you know, lead
what needs
to
be done between the two biggest economies in the world to keep the game of competition, but with no conflicts?
You know, this is really a good question. I think, you know, that requires, you know, the change of attitudes and the change of the perception of, you know, particularly by the United States, you know, about China. So that is very important because, you know, if they don't really perceive China as a partner or as a country that they can work with, you know, against global challenges and including domestic challenges, you know, and if they really see China as a kind of a rivalry, you know, if they go into that direction, I think the picture is going to be totally different. And if you look at the political environment, that seems to be pointing to that direction, and that I think it is going to impact the future choices of policies and decisions with regard to bilateral relations.
But along those lines, I mean, there's something that really stood out to me throughout this thing. Now, you have three different power bases in the United States. You have the people, you have the business, and then you have the political elites. Now, the political elites in Washington have not shown on a bipartisan basis that they're very interested in any kind of change. They're still hitting all the same points. You know, and you've heard it. You know, suspicion of China. We got to watch them. More bills, more actions. Now, business, as you saw, not one, three standing ovations. Marked contrast. I don't think there's anything similar on Biden's side. So, you know, I think she is very, very keen on talking directly to those interested. But also, the people-to-people exchange is very much focused on the people itself. Right. He was reminding people of what he had done in the past, going to Iowa, a lot of stories in there, old pictures, this type of thing. It was a very human touch. Now, these are medium to long-term change issues. But remember, it's the people who elect the leaders. So if you can get the confidence of the people, all right, and they understand that, you know, Chinese and Americans are exactly the same, just like Latin Americans, everybody in the world, they want, you know, security, development, and respect.
They want a better life.
Yes.
Right. And the benign relationship between China and the US actually can enable a better life, not only for the people in the US, but for global.
And this is what you really saw is that you had this. This meeting was the most controversial. It overshadowed everything else.
Right.
And all 19 other economies that were represented there were keying in on this, including the global markets, which kind of wasn't that impressed. They wanted to see more cooperation, not less. Right. So right now, the U.S. has, a certain degree, isolated itself. You can see that in the votes in the UN on conflict issues, but also the markets themselves were like, hey, get in line. Let's do some business. Right. Economic times are hard. We need to do more.
That's why connectivity comes in first as the theme of this year's APEC meeting. We'll break down the theme of the APEC meeting later, but Xi Jinping actually said China is consistently committed, as what you said, a stable, healthy, and sustainable relationship with the U.S. And you said U.S., at least Biden, still has the ideology of zero-sum. So how can this stable, healthy, and sustainable relationship be made, be created? What kind of relationship should it look like?
Well, I'm going to be very honest with you. It's going to take generational change.
Generational
change, yes. I mean, right now you have people in Washington, I mean, they're in their 80s and things like that. They have very fixed ideas about what America is, what America has done, and what it stands for. The younger generation, once you start probing into a lot of these surveys that they've done, very clear that they have different attitudes. They're more concerned about ecology, climate warming, things like that. And they're very concerned about these conflicts. So I do think that there is a generational change, and I think China's going about this with a very soft approach to saying we need to get to know each other.
Right. I think probably there might be another kind of a scenario when the situation, completely changed, by such that, for example, the American economy is not going to be the same like it is today, and the there's a kind of, internal type of request for cooperation, and they recognize, for example, the damage is being done, from this kind of, competition with China, and of course, there are, related type of, issues, to that, and that might be a kind of an opportunity, for for the two countries to be able to sit down together and to redefine.
We actually
for example,
have seen some eagerness, it's a strong eagerness actually from the U.S. business, especially from their exhibition in the CIIE lately. They are very eager to grab the huge market of China. They're thirsty for that, but still we are seeing U.S. suppression on China's technology. And
that's
Xi Jinping
Washington.
actually.
That's Washington.
That's
not
Washington.
business.
Right.
You go down the line, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, U.S. Business Chamber, they are actively trying to. But the problem right now is politically, if a company says, look, if we don't have business in China, that takes away a lot of our growth. They're branded as China huggers, panda, lover, this kind of stuff. And that's nonsense. Jobs in America runs on business. It's still we're still a huge export country.
Did the meeting
as a
between the
matter of
two
fact,
presidents actually addressed this issue in particular? About U.S. suppression on China's technological development?
Well, it's continuing. They said they're going to talk about it. AI was as close as they got, but in very vague terms. It's going to be turned back to the working groups. But in terms of trying to suppress it, no. But I mean, there are so many other things that could have been talked about. For instance, the WTO, which is hamstrung. Why? Because the U.S. will not allow appellate judges to be appointed. So there is so much more out there. I think the world would love to have the WTO back in action to settle issues, to make it a lot easier. Instead of having trade wars, you have disputes, you take them somewhere and resolve them.
Yes, as a matter of fact, I think we are seeing two Americas. One is business America, and the other is the America of politics.
That's always the case in the U.S.
Yes, the two Americas, they are not really, one country.
Yeah, but they always say power and money are never far apart. But when they do get far apart, then you have issues. You have destabilization within the people themselves. But in the end, America is a democracy, and the people are going to decide. So I think it's really important that she is going there, and he's talking about what his three pillars are: development, security, and this is internal and external, and then respect, right, and responsibility. That's the civilization initiative, the global things. These are the types of things, I mean, they sound soft, but these are the really things that matter. Morality in the way that you conduct yourself is very important. How can we have a relationship if you think that I'm trying, there's no trust.
Right,
that perhaps
mutual trust and mutual respect
Exactly.
are very important.
And
I
that
will
takes a
continue
picture.
our discussions later on, gentlemen. And you are now watching our special coverage on the APEC meetings. We'll be right back after this.
The dynamics of Asia-Pacific economies at play here in San Francisco.
We will delve into their economic interdependence
and uncover strategies for cooperation.
We'll get you exclusive insights into new developments on China-US relations
and important new ties shaping our future.
We speak to policymakers, business leaders,
and influential decision makers.
So you will have a front row seat to discussions and debates at APEC 2023.
Chinese President Xi Jinping has told the APEC economic leaders meeting that sustainable development is the key to resolving global challenges. He welcomed APEC's progress in implementing the Putrajaya Vision 2040 and the Bangkok goals on biocircular green economy, which have significantly contributed to global green and sustainable growth.
President Xi Jinping proposed a threefold approach to furthering global sustainable development under the current circumstances. His first proposal was to accelerate the implementation of the UN 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. He emphasized the importance of placing development at the center of the global agenda and building a political consensus for cooperative development across nations. In regard to China's efforts, President Xi highlighted the Global Development Initiative, aimed at promoting synergy among the international community to address development deficits. He spoke of China's commitment to a comprehensive green and low-carbon transformation of its economy and society, which aligns with the objectives of harmonious coexistence between humanity and nature. The second proposal by President Xi was to forge a new path of green development transformation. This involves promoting the transformation and upgrading of energy, industrial and transportation structures in a way that coordinates carbon reduction, pollution reduction, green expansion and growth. He emphasized the importance of fair labor transformation and the creation of high-quality employment opportunities. Thirdly, President Xi called for building global synergy to address climate change. He urged countries to uphold the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change as the main channel in global climate governance. This includes adhering to the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities, formulating climate targets based on national conditions, and addressing the needs of developing countries in terms of financing, capacity building, and technology transfer. He stressed the importance of the full and effective implementation of the Convention and the Paris Agreement. To further these goals, China plans to continue deepening cooperation in green infrastructure, green energy, green transportation, and other fields under the Green Belt and Road Initiative. This includes support for developing countries through the Special Fund for South-South Cooperation on Climate Change. In conclusion, President Xi expressed China's readiness to collaborate with all parties to make significant contributions towards building a global development community and a clean, beautiful world.
And Chinese President Xi Jinping has called for unity to achieve better Asia-Pacific cooperation at the APEC CEO Summit. In his written speech, President Xi said openness and inclusiveness are defining features of Asia-Pacific cooperation. He said the region's development has been achieved not through provoking antagonism and confrontation. He also said development for all is the overarching goal of Asia-Pacific cooperation, and seeking common ground while shelving differences is the best practice. President Xi said development is only possible with cooperation, and decoupling and supply chain disruptions are not in anyone's interests. He also said the APEC Putrajaya vision lays out its vision for an Asia-Pacific community by 2040. The Chinese president said China remains the most powerful engine of global growth and will generate 1/3 of global growth this year. President Xi also added that China remains committed to pursuing development with its doors open and will advance high standard opening up and further expand market access. And being among the earliest members, China has actively initiated and contributed to the expansion of APEC's influence in global economic cooperation. And our Wang Ke has more.
APEC, or Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, started taking shape in 1989. 2 years later, China joined APEC. Today, APEC is home to 38% of the world's population, representing approximately 48% of global trade in goods and services, and comprising more than 60% of world GDP. China alone contributes 18% to global GDP and has taken active initiatives within the bloc. For example, in the digital economy, China's endorsed a work plan for the APEC Internet and Digital Economy Roadmap has been incorporated into the Putrajaya Vision 2040, the bloc's new long-term blueprint for economic cooperation. This aims to bridge the digital divide in the APEC region, with the digital economy projected to surge to around 70% of global economy.
And now we're seeing that Chinese President Xi Jinping is stepping in the venue where the APEC meeting, informal leaders meeting, is happening. And before this, President Xi Jinping and US President Joe Biden had a very significant one-on-one meeting. And the APEC countries, APEC members, have all observed what happened during the one-on-one meeting and what messages it sent out. Well, in connection with the recent CRIE in Shanghai, Thailand's Deputy Prime Minister has emphasized the pivotal role trade plays in bringing countries together. Let's take a listen.
In the next 5 years, we will see China's efforts to open up and bring together different parts of the world through trade and commerce. It is worthy of praise and support. For Thailand and many other countries, we are pleased with China's objective, which will bring us closer together. The saying that we are brothers and sisters is reflected in the nature of our trade and our business activities. The global economy has been gloomy for a long time. It has impacted many countries. It is also an issue that has become a problem for us. The problem of inflation and interest rates are also factors that limit the growth of the global economy. With large countries like China, that is located in Asia, that has established strong relationships, not only in Asia but every continent in the world, is very interesting. Especially when it comes to China and ASEAN, a lot of mechanisms have been created to strengthen relationships. I believe that this will provide an opportunity for all countries in this region to create higher economic growth. I think it can make the global economy grow stronger, especially because of this region, because we have built the foundation of mutual respect that supports one another to open up our economies, where economies of different sizes can also develop and grow. Thai-China ASEAN cooperation will really help strengthen the region.
All right, now let's get back to our discussion with Anna Tangen and also Mr. Li Yong. About the APEC meeting, before we start to break down the theme of this year, I'd like to, I'm very curious about the name of the APEC meeting. It's called APEC Informal Leaders Meeting. Since all the leaders are there, why is it informal, Mr. Li?
Well, I think it is different from like World Health Organization or World Trade Organization. This is really a kind of organization that does not really have a kind of a binding effects on the member economies. And basically, you know, this is a kind of a, I would like to call it forum or platform on which member economies are coming together, you know, to work, for example, on some of the current issues and future challenges and so on. And of course, you know, the future visions of the Asia-Pacific community, even, you know, with a lot of focus on the trade and investment flows. And that leads to the discussion of the Asia-Pacific FTA, which is in abbreviation called FTA-AP, and that has been discussed for quite a bit of time, but this time, during this edition of the meeting, we didn't really hear a lot from the host, and of course, you know, China has talked about this, and President Xi Jinping specifically mentioned about this as a kind of a future direction of the economic trade relations.
So you do think, although it's informal leaders meeting, but still the APEC meeting or the result or the outcome of the meeting can still steer the future trend of the local or the Pacific Rim economic development.
Yes, exactly. That is called, you know, APEC way. You know, all the decisions, you know, will be made on a voluntary basis, and all the changes will be made incremental and so on and so forth. But it is a kind of a non-binding but voluntary, and because of the size of the member, I mean the size of APEC being represented in the world economy, and it has really a significant impact. And the future direction of APEC member economies is going to.
And I completely agree. I mean, if you look at APEC, it represents, although it's going back to '89, it represents the future. And what I mean by that, it's aspirational. It is a group of economies that come together to talk about what they want to happen. All right, as you said, no enforcement mechanism. This is not the WTO, et cetera. But that is the way that you run a multilateral world. All right, it is not somebody telling you, I'm setting the agenda and you follow it. It is, let us get together and informally, let's talk. Let us really have an exchange of ideas, get away from standard positions. Here's what's important to me. Can we work on that as a group? And I think that's so important
to
these days.
Change ideas instead of making any legally binding policies.
Well, there is no legally binding. I mean, these are sovereign entities in most cases. So
that's where we need to talk about the theme of this year's APEC meeting: connectivity, inclusiveness, and innovation. First of all, connectivity. Well, given the very complex, very negative global environment, such as COVID, such as Russia-Ukraine conflicts, and now Gaza, the global supply chains are hugely damaged and also led to historic highs of inflation in many countries. That's why a lot of countries have adopted very conservative and protective policies, which are not very good for global economic growth. Do you think APEC members or APEC economies can have a positive role to play in change the negative environment?
I'd love to say
or steer
yes.
away from that.
Well, no, I mean, this is the thing about a multilateral world. It's not about rules because there's no one to enforce them. But when you have these things and you have leaders meet and they informally say, listen, here we're all facing issues. Here are the issues for me. I'd like to, get some sort of reaction from you or at least some help, right? It is going down to this aspirational level where countries have to recognize each other's things. Now, we're talking about connectivity in terms of the global supply chain, but quite frankly, there's another deeper connectivity, and that is between all of these economies and the people that are represented in them. You have very, very different political apparatuses and things like that, but they can be in harmony, as we've seen at this meeting, even with their differences. It's not about conformity, uniformity. It is simply accepting that we each have, very, very different ideas about things, but that we're all human in the end. And we need to act that way. There is a very strong moral component, and I keep repeating this, but you cannot have trust if you don't think the other person is going to act correctly, and that means that you have to believe that they have a moral code. And this is so important.
So given, with that being said, do you think the kind of more friendly China-US relations that people can see from this meeting, especially the meeting between President Xi Jinping and President Joe Biden this time, that the APEC meeting can get a signal of a better connectivity trend in the future?
Well, I'm going to be very frank about this. I mean, when it comes down to it, China was the adult in the room this time. I mean, it was Xi Jinping reaching out to different levels, people talking about on the people-to-people exchanges, talking about his own experiences, bringing it down to the level where we can understand each other. Then to business, he said, look, we're going to do better and we're going to do more. Right? The U.S. was not as forthcoming on that. They say, well, we have to be more guarded. There are things, we want to set the agenda, rules of the road. I was interested in Nathan, who was the expert who talked, who said, well, China needs to accept this agenda being put forward by the U.S. That is not what APEC is about. Right. APEC is about free, open discussion and setting agendas that work for everybody. Not one country dictating what the rules of the road are.
Right. So connectivity, I think you need to understand differently. It's not just economic connectivity. It's also about people connectivity. It is also about policy connectivity, and behind those connectivities, there need to be a common goal. If one is trying to get everybody else to follow, that is not really connectivity. I think connectivity is based on the respect for differences and going forward, to achieve, for example, common goals of development, prosperity, being good for the future. So that, I think, is the real meaning of connectivity. So connectivity can be understood, under different kind of a context.
Right, and I think connectivity, although the APEC region is rich in cultures, it has cultural diversities, but still connectivity means stable, means sustainability.
Respect.
Respect and trust,
yes.
As what you said. And about the other two keywords, inclusiveness and innovation, I think these two probably to some extent means the same thing, because innovation needs inclusiveness and needs a stable soil. And do you think most of the APEC economies are emerging economies or developing economies? Do you think a stable soil means the resource from, or the soil from the developing countries? Mr. Li.
Right, I think innovation needs to be made in an open and free environment.
Oh, now let's take a look at the site of the APEC informal leaders meeting, and the US President Joe Biden is giving a speech. All right, we'll get to know what Biden said is going to say a moment later and continue our discussion here. Well, about the emerging economies in the APEC region, do you think innovation should happen more in the emerging economies?
I think innovation, as I said, needs to be made in a kind of an open and free environment, and that, I think, it requires cooperation and the free flow of technology.
Emerging economies and developing countries are craving for more openness, for more connectivity, for more openness.
For transfer of technologies, for sharing of technologies, right. That is very important. And also for the kind of environment where innovative spirit, innovative environment that are being shared, among each of the member economies. I think that's very important.
This is so important. The digital revolution is going to spawn a new definition of wealth. Those who own the IP will be served by those who don't. And I literally mean that. If you don't have access to this kind of things, if you're not part of the development, if you're not inclusive, if you're not included in, you'll be shut out. And this is very important. I mean, you can see exactly what China did during the pandemic. 20 different production facilities were set up in other countries. Now, that's quite different from the US approach to it, which is, we have it, you want it, you buy it. Okay, there were some donations, but it wasn't about sharing the technology. There was a lot of fighting going back and forth. The large pharma said, no, this is our opportunity to cash in, don't get in our way, let the market decide. So there's a very different attitude, and you see that now in the Middle East, in Africa, South America, ASEAN. They're talking about joint development of new technologies. That is the Chinese approach, and that is what sustainability is about. You cannot have a better world if you're not willing to share. All right, you're just going to create new inequalities of wealth, and we have seen inequality doesn't work. It's not stable.
Yeah, share is also part of the effort to help each other. For example, in the development of digital economy, emerging economies will need help from more sophisticated countries in terms of capacity building, helping to to foster their pool of digital talents. For example, in China has a kind of a program with Indonesia to help them to grow their digital talents, to make sure that they have enough talents to deal with their future ambition of digital economy.
That's where our Belt and Road initiative comes in.
Exactly. So this sharing is based on the goodwill of working together, cooperation. That is very important. So cooperation has become a key word of this APEC summit. A lot of people are talking about cooperation. Our President Xi Jinping has been talking about cooperation. So it is really, really important, for.
But it's very, very simple. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And you hear a lot about these realpolitik, approaches where I got to get mine. This is a game. The winner takes all. That is not the world going forward. When you have climate change, when you have so many issues that have to be addressed, development, inequality, the amount of education that is necessary for developing countries, young countries that have huge populations of young people but not access to the education they need. This is not something you can give them a loan for 7 years. Well, what happens after 7 years? Well, education is something that is 20, 30 years down the road, but it has to be done. Otherwise, you create an underclass of economies who are forever locked out.
But still, the region has the two biggest economies in the world, China, the US and China. So the economic performance of those two countries are very important. How would you assess the economic performance in the US and China, Mr. Li?
Well, of course, both countries provide opportunities for the rest of the world in terms of the two countries being big markets. Okay, and at the same time, they are two key suppliers. For example, the United States, advanced technologies, China, different kinds of products, including machinery and some of the consumer goods, for example. So these are the two countries, that have a lot of impact. If the two countries, in terms of economic growth, they are prosperous, they are going to bring a lot of opportunities for the rest of the world. But if the two countries are fighting against each other on the basis of kind of a zero sum, and it is not really going to bring opportunities. That is going to have negative impact, on the rest of the world.
What about you? What's your assessment of the two countries' economic performance?
Okay.
Do you think it's promising? Enough?
Together, I mean, this is a perfect example.
For instance, the IMF actually raised its GDP growth outlook of China to 5.4% this year and 4.6% for next year, 2024. How do you see that?
Well, and you had the World Bank revised up at 4.8. So you have a range of predicted growth. The fact is, China has been the most dynamic economy. You heard Xi Jinping say 1/3 of the world's growth this year is coming from China. Right? That's very, very significant. I keep hearing and reading the financial pages. Oh, China's slowing down. Oh, things are going badly. Hey, there's a global situation going on. All right, China is actually doing something about it. And that was where the 10-year anniversary of Belt and Road really kind of comes up. $1 trillion invested, economies lifted up, connectivity created, sustainability increased, sharing of innovation. So China isn't just talking, it is actually doing. And that is the real test. But this is not a situation where China wants the U.S. to lose. To the contrary, I mean, the U.S. has problems with bonds, massive debt that's increasing. I know that there's a reason that Janet Yellen in those pictures is sitting next to Joe Biden, that she was the one who met at the airport. And that is because the U.S. has real concerns. 2 days ago, they issued $140 billion worth of bonds. And what happened is the group that was offering the bonds had to take them back, even though they raised rates dramatically. They didn't find any takers. And this is not something where China is saying, oh, isn't that great? No, to the opposite. No one wants the U.S., which is almost 20% of the world's demand, to go away. If that happens, you will have a massive global recession. It will affect China. So this is a perfect example of where countries have to work together or they will sink as one.
But we're still seeing a very protective world, or multinationalism is not very popular at the moment, at least. So how do you see the current sentiment towards investment or business together with China? The world's sentiment towards China.
Well, the world's sentiment towards China has been influenced by the media, and the media has been very much influenced by the $90 billion a year spent by the U.S. government on various intelligence and disinformation campaigns, despite this cry that everybody's spying on us. The truth is the U.S. spies more on anybody than probably all countries combined.
But when it comes down to business, it would be another story.
Business is
CRI actually reflects to another story.
Well, it
business
does.
People are very enthusiastic of being in China.
But that's the disconnect that's there. The political elites are saying we have to be wary of China. The economic elites, all right, businesses, they didn't stand up 3 times for Xi Jinping because they needed to stretch their legs, all right? They were there and saying full-throated, yes, this is what we want. So, yeah, you have a separation, as we were talking about, between power and money. And right now, the swing vote are the people. So China's taking a very long-term view of this and trying to address that, trying to instill confidence. Come to China, understand us, and then perhaps you won't believe all the things you read about in the press.
I think there's I have an interesting observation that many multinational companies who have a lot of interest in China, because of the political pressure and so on and so forth, they started to talk about their business development in Asia Pacific or in Asia without really specifically talking about their business development in China, which really, accounts a big share in their, total Asia development. So that is actually the situation. Businesses, they have their own, logics in terms of, looking at the opportunities of a country. They obviously need to have a market as big as China. And that is going to generate opportunities more than, the kind of, what kind of political gain that they can get.
The huge market in China is very important to all the business people in the world. And China actually needs the global business people as well, and enterprises as well to invest in China. That's why President Xi Jinping actually sent out an invitation to the US entrepreneurs and actually to the global entrepreneurs at the banquet welcoming him this time. And he said China will continue with its high-level opening up and providing a market-oriented, law-based and world-class business environment. Why do you think, Mr. Li, that President Xi Jinping stressed or reiterated that?
I'd like to go back to our discussion about connectivity. This is Chinese understanding of connectivity in terms of the rules, in terms of the legal system, in terms of business environment. China is going to be moving, to the highest level, to be connected, seamlessly, with the rest of the world to make sure that companies are coming to do business or invest in China are going to get what they expect to get. Of course, there are a lot of competition, business competition, they need to survive that, but, in terms of the regulatory environment, that is going to be, for example, the same, as those in other countries, And of course, China is aiming at the highest level of opening up, and to provide the most free business opportunities or environments for foreign business to operate.
And what's your assessment of China's investment environment? Do you think it's friendly enough to welcome all the entrepreneurs, businesses, enterprises from all over the world?
Well, there are always some hiccups. And right now you have a very, very strong message being sent from the top. It has to work its way all the way down. I mean, I've bumped into people and say, oh, I got hassled at the airport, something like this. That has to go through. The problem is when you start creating kind of this negative press, all right, Chinese people are very proud. Very, you know, they're proud of their accomplishments and what they've done over 45 years, and justifiably so. It's quite a story.
We are hospitable at the same time.
You were very hospitable and things like that, but you know, if I keep slapping you, there comes a certain point where you resent it. I know that sounds strange, but you know, if I'm always downgrading you and saying, oh, you're a bad person and things like this, it does have an effect. Now, in terms of welcoming people back, I just came back from a Middle Eastern country, and boy, it was very, very nice. I sailed through the airport. There were no hassles whatsoever, and I think it will come. There's still always questions about convertibility. Actually, there was this thing where there was a downtrend in the amount of FDI. Companies were pulling it out. And somebody said, oh, that's terrible. And I said, no, it's great. And I said, what? I said, look, companies were able to take out their profits because a lot of their programs had finished. And quite frankly, they need that money because it's very expensive to borrow money in their home countries, especially in the US and Europe right now. Rates are skyrocketing and things like that. So they're doing that. But that signals to companies that, yes, I can go into China, I can make money, and I can get it out when I need it. This is exactly what is necessary. And if you start looking at the valuations of stocks in China, they're very cheap. So you're going to continue to see people. You have a working economy that is planned, that makes adjustments as necessary to go forward. It has a really good track record, all right? And it's dynamic. Largest market in the world, largest middle class disposable income in the world, right? This is the place you want to be, the country that's providing 1/3 of the world's growth. You can look at other countries, and I'm not saying you shouldn't invest there. I'm just saying that you know, from a business point of view, you want to invest where there is a future.
Right, so that you think the future actually lies in China.
Look,
or developing economies like China, emerging economies like China. So how do you see the relationship between China and other APEC economies? Are they going to be competitive in that way, or are they going to be cooperative partners?
See, that was the question I would expect from somebody in the United States, because it's always like, who's it good for? Who's going to win here? No. China's at the center of a huge outpouring of global growth. Look at APEC. APEC is now the #1 trade partner for China. Right. It's creating jobs in addition to the infrastructure that allowed that to happen. All right, it's growing. And why? It's great for China because as it grows, all right, it is using a lot of goods from China. For instance, you can say, oh, this garment was made in Bangladesh. Well, that's great. Where did the buttons come from? China. Where did the cloth come from? China. Where did the thread come from? China. Where did the zipper come from? China. All right? It was assembled there, but it's providing jobs. Jobs that would not be economically feasible if they were in China. So China has said, with the Belt and Road, we intend to move industries that are no longer viable in China outward.
But those are manufacturing sector, manufacturing industries. How about high tech? Because innovation takes a very important part of this year's APEC meeting. How about the innovative industry, innovative sector? How do what role does that play in the internal connectivity or cooperation among APEC economies, Mr. Li?
Yeah, you will have to look at it in perspectives. You know, if we are looking at the ideal world, technology should really be shared, be transferred, be used to create, better industries, more efficient businesses, and so on and so forth. But the situation is going to be different if somebody uses technology as a kind of a tool or weapon and to suppress certain countries. That I think is going to lead to not really to the maximum or optimize the usage of the technology. So we will have to look at that. If we have that problem, we need to address it. You know, I think it should become the consensus of the APEC economies, you know, to try to remove that kind of a situation, to remove any barriers, you know, for technologies to move freely, you know, among member economies, as well as to other parts of the world.
Okay, we'll continue our discussion later on in our special coverage. And now for the latest on the ground, the informal leaders meeting is going on. Let's bring in our reporter Hendrik Brandy. Hendrik, US President Joe Biden has just delivered his speech. Can you bring us up to date on that?
Absolutely. President Biden just did address the economic leaders retreat. The retreat began a few minutes late here. The president walked into the room. He was the first to speak. He was followed by the president of Peru. Peru, of course, will be the host country for APEC next year. So there was a ceremonial passing of the torch, as it were, from Biden to Peru's president after his remarks. The president spoke about some of the themes that we've been hearing about all week here at APEC, basically recapped some of the achievements that the leaders and the countries have made. He spoke about how they've tried to strengthen supply chains among the 21 member economies. He talked about the importance of a clean energy transition and also to fight corruption. So those were three accomplishments that he kind of recapped and hearkened back to as things that have been where they've been able to move forward here over the past couple of days here in San Francisco. During his remarks this morning, which were just concluded, he said he announced three new initiatives or three priority items, one of them involving inclusive growth. He said they've agreed amongst all of the member economies to implement a Women in Sustainable Economy initiative, finding ways to incorporate women into the green and blue economies, he said, you know, and obviously a very important subject matter and a very important area in the years ahead. Also spoke about the importance of the digital economy and safeguards against the use of artificial intelligence. And lastly, he just again had or restated his unwavering essential commitment to the Asian Pacific economies. Those were kind of his three touchstones in his remarks. As I mentioned, he then passed the torch to Peru's president, who also reiterated the importance of women empowerment and how all of these economies are going to be focusing on that in the months to come. And then they, as they often do, they asked the press to leave the meeting room, and now they are meeting amongst themselves behind closed doors, and we'll see what comes out of that, whether there are any more announcements, what some of the priority items are, like that. Back to you.
All right, thank you very much. Hendrik Brandy reporting from San Francisco. Well, as he said, the three Latin American economies that are APEC members are Chile, Mexico, and Peru will chair the APEC next year. And now let's go to RCA in Washington to find out more. RCA, hello again.
Dongning, fostering stronger relationships between Asia-Pacific economies and Latin America also on the agenda during APEC. Chinese President Xi Jinping took steps towards that goal by meeting several leaders from that region. CGTN's Alistair Boverstock is live for us in Mexico City. Alistair, one of those key meetings, of course, was with Mexico's president. What more can you tell us about that?
Well, you're absolutely right, RCA. The APEC has seen numerous bilateral meetings, and not least when it comes to Latin America and China, when there are three currently members of the APEC from Latin America, and two of them held bilateral meetings. Peru and President Boluarte held bilateral meeting with President Xi Jinping, as well as, you correctly mentioned, President López Obrador of Mexico, during which the two countries pledged closer collaboration, taking that relationship, which is already very solid, to the next level in a series of bilateral meetings which have given a great deal of hope for the future of cross-Pacific relations between Latin America and China.
It has been a productive week at APEC for Chinese relations with its most geographically distant partners in the Pacific, Latin America. President Xi Jinping held bilateral meetings with his counterparts from Mexico and Peru in San Francisco, where, following the meeting with Mexican President López Obrador, China's foreign ministry stated the two countries had pledged to strengthen strategic alignment and expand cooperation in emerging industries. For Carlos Aquino, the director of Peru's San Marcos University's Center for Asian Studies, China's importance in Latin America has expanded in recent years.
In recent years, China has significantly increased its presence in Latin America. Over the past 2 decades, bilateral trade has grown by 3,500%, from $14 billion in the year 2000 to $500 billion in 2022. And for many countries in the region, China has become the principal trading partner.
For Latinos watching the APEC gathering in San Francisco, the bilateral meetings with China were highly significant. As commercial ties grow, so do diplomatic relations, a significant factor for John Valdeiglesias, professor of Asian Studies in Peru.
One of China's great advantages in the region is the very positive public opinion, particularly compared to other global powers. China has no negative history in the region and is viewed as a partner for commerce and investment.
That investment is significant. Of the 3 Latino APEC members, 2 are fully signed up to China's Belt and Road Initiative. Chilean President Gabriel Boric attended the Belt and Road Forum in Beijing last month, and Peru has a Pacific megaport slated for opening in late 2024 with the support of China.
Latin America needs infrastructure, ports, airports, railways, and China has the experience, the capital, and the willingness to help. And 21 Latin and Caribbean countries are part of the Belt and Road Initiative. As a result, China has become the largest investor in this region.
Colombian President Gustavo Petro was also present in San Francisco as his country continues to seek APEC membership, a vital group as Latin America looks increasingly across the Pacific when it comes to international relations.
So while the bilateral meeting between President Xi and President Biden has made headlines around the world, here in Latin America it's a different story as these countries focus on their own leaders' meetings with the Chinese top officials. And I'd just like to show you how important. Here on the front page of a national newspaper here today, we can see that the front page story features Mexico's president here meeting with President Xi Jinping and carrying the headline, China proposes relations with Mexico to level. These meetings have been in America for these countries, and it's something which China sees, certainly Mexico, being very important when it comes to taking those relationships to the next level throughout the region. Last year, 2022, saw China and Mexico celebrate 50 years of diplomatic relations. This year, 2023, saw 1 decade since the signing of the strategic partnership between China and Mexico, and next year is set to celebrate a decade since CELAC, the China, Latin America and Caribbean Forum, something, a group meeting which opened ties throughout this region. Commerce, when it comes to cultural and educational and technological exchange, as well as when it comes to
Alistair Boverstock, live for us in Mexico City. Thank you. Now, Peru's Minister of Foreign Trade and Tourism says Chinese investment is helping transform his country into a regional hub. We sat down with him at APEC and asked about the bilateral relationship between China and Peru.
Yes, it's a very, very important one because the 2 main partners for us are USA and China. In the case of China, they are mainly buyers of commodities, mainly minerals, fish meal. But in the case of USA, is manufacturing, so more added value, more impact in terms of employment. But in both cases are important markets for us. And in the case of China, and we discussed it with them, they are not only buying now some manufactured products, but also they are investing not only in the mining sector, that was the main focus for them, but they're investing in infrastructure. They have invested in a very important port that is called Shanghai. And the slogan is from Shanghai to Shanghai, because it goes directly and with a reduction of the freight. But it's very important because it is becoming a very important hub, not for Peru, but for South America. So in the case of products from Chile or Colombia, the reduction of freight is very important because it reduces about 8 to 10 days the transport to China. And in the case of the Brazilians, instead of going through Panama, they can save about 20 days going directly to China. So this is a very, very important issue because it is becoming Peru a real hub in terms of maritime service and in terms of airport too. We are doing an important investment in infrastructure and in connectivity. So it is very important.
Now, Peru views hosting next year's APEC gathering as a chance to boost its own economy. Dan Collins in Lima with that part of the story.
Trade with China has been crucial to Peru's stellar growth over 2 decades. From 1995 to 2023, Peruvian exports to China increased by more than 40 times, from $363 million to $17.7 billion. Peru has held the rolling presidency of the Asia-Pacific Regional Economic Forum twice before, but the third occasion could not come at a better time. Peru's finance minister, Alex Contreras, announced last month that the economy is in recession. Growth in the country, once considered the star in Latin America, has stagnated for more than 2 quarters.
China is South America's top trading partner, and Peru is no exception. The Asian giant has also been a major source of foreign direct investment for the country. Its demand for raw materials from copper-rich Peru has powered GDP growth since the early 2000s.
Now the construction of a new Pacific port in Chancay, just north of Peru's coastal capital, could revitalize bilateral trade.
APEC is a great opportunity for us to show that from the Peruvian-Chinese investment sector, we are ready to attract companies from around the world.
The port is a private venture between Chinese state-owned conglomerate COSCO Shipping Ports Limited, with 60% of its stake, and the Peruvian mining company Volcan with 40%. A huge initial investment of $3.6 billion is being made into the COSCO megaport, which will form part of China's Belt and Road Initiative. Rosario Santa Gadea, director with the Center for China and Asia-Pacific Studies at Lima's Pacific University, says the port would reconnect Peru with global value chains.
If we can design and implement a Trans-Pacific Economic Corridor between Peru and China based on Chancay and the special economic zone related to that port, then we will move in the right direction.
A special economic zone is also planned to include an industrial park around the port to take advantage of China's huge marketplace. Dan Collins, CGTN, Lima.
And for now, that's it for me in Washington. Dong Ning, back to you.
All right, thank you very much, Ase, for all that. And your team in Washington, D.C. as well. Let's bring back Kendricks and Brandy in San Francisco now. We'll have a quick wrap of what's transpired these past few hours later. And before that, let's get in another round of discussion with our studio guests. So, the other 19 APEC members were, of course, closely watching the signals or messages sent out from the one-on-one meeting between Chinese and US presidents here. And they needed to hear a very positive signal on the relationship, bilateral relationship, and I think they've got that to some extent. But do you think they still need to strike a balance between the 2 biggest economies in the world, Mr. Lee?
Well, it depends. It depends,
On what?
Their economic trade relations with United States, for example.
That's true. Take the South American countries, for example. They are close to the US, but countries like Brazil, they're one of the BRICS countries, and Peru are setting up a trade channel with China as well, very close trade relations with China as well.
Yes,
so do you think they need to strike a balance there?
I think, most of the countries, they are sovereign countries, they can make their own decision making. Their decision might be affected, by the worsening of the bilateral, of China-US relations. But in general, I think, they will look, the two countries more separately in terms of which, for example, country, that they can work with and benefit them. And from the early stories, like Peru, they are benefiting the economic trade relations, with China, and that is very important because they need the infrastructure and the investment in infrastructure, particularly from China, and they see it as a kind of an opportunity, and they also expect more investment in industrial parks, which will, I think, eventually help, their local economy to climb up the value chain. Instead of exporting, for example, the raw materials, they might be able, to produce some of the manufactured products. That will, I think, eventually change the fundamentals of their comparative advantages. And I think that is going to benefit them. So basically, I think those countries, they are going to, to relate the relationship to the local economic development.
I'm going to make it simpler. Right?
So actually, Mr. Li thought that the other member economies in APEC have transferred from a dilemma to business opportunities. What's your take?
It's very simple. Most of these countries, apart from maybe Canada, don't want to choose, right? It is not in their interest to choose. They have obviously relations with both countries. They want to keep them. China is not asking anybody to choose. There was no precondition. Well, we're going to help you with this port in Peru, which is absolutely transformational. People don't realize the Andes Mountains have always divided South America. Now there's a way through. 20 days for especially agricultural exports is very, very important to Brazil. Now they have an outlet that can get them there, and it saves money. You don't have to pay passage through the Panama Canal. So very important. China doesn't say you have to choose. It says, oh, this is trade. Trade is good for everybody, right? The U.S. though still kind of like says, are you on our side? We want you to choose. Are you on the side of the angels? And by the way, we're the angels.
Hello, angels.
Yeah, hello, angels. Yeah. Where's Charlie? Oh no, right.
Where's Charlie?
So at the end of the day, I think, given the performance there, I think there's a lot more confidence that Xi Jinping was expressing the values of the vast majority of the economies in APEC. Biden, I think, took a swing but kind of missed. Once again, a lot of rhetoric, as he said in his speech, supply chains, clean energy, corruption, where's the beef? Yeah, where are the things that you are doing? Talking about women in economy, great. What are you doing to make it happen? Whereas all of those economies look at China, they say, yeah, we have projects all over the place where you've improved our connectivity. And this is really important. The U.S. needs to engage more. It is not bad for China if the U.S. participates in creating more infrastructure. It's great for everybody.
Right, and actually there have been very mature agreements among the APEC countries, or initiatives among the APEC countries to cooperate with each other. For instance, the CPTPP and RCEP. So what kind of role do you think those agreements play in internal cooperation among the APEC countries?
Well, I want to weigh in before you do. U.S. isn't part of either one.
Right.
And that
That's
is,
true.
that is the issue. Why did, obviously Donald Trump didn't like it. He said, I'm getting out of the TPP.
But are they going to be? Are they going to steer away from the trend?
I hope not, because global growth depends on cooperation, not setting up little yards and high fences. So clearly the U.S. needs to engage. I think there's a desire, but politically, within the United States, all free trade agreements have been tarnished because they've been told they stole your jobs, right?
What we're seeing now is President Xi Jinping speaking at
I
the
am
informal
very
leaders
pleased
meeting.
to attend the 30th APEC leaders meeting, and I'm grateful to the arrangement of the organizing community. APEC has always been in the frontier of openness and transformation. We have created a worldly followed Asia-Pacific region. Now, the current world economy is facing multiple risks. We must reflect upon this situation. What can we do to create a new Asia-Pacific region and the next golden years for Asia-Pacific region? And how can APEC play a bigger role in that regard? We must adhere to the spirit of cooperation, echo the call of the era, and have win-win cooperation. By joining hands, we hope to create a community for Asia-Pacific region. And we have several recommendations to that end. First of all, we must actively encourage technical exchange so as to create an open, equitable, fair, non-discriminating technological community. We support the development of AI, cloud computing, big data, and other sectors to accelerate the digital transformation. And we hope to create the new momentum for Asia-Pacific development. For example, we will support the digital urban rejuvenation, village rejuvenation, and low-carbon development. Second, we adhere to the principle of openness. For example, we will support open trade development and observe the multilateralism principle upheld by the WTO to ensure steady and smooth trade worldwide. We will also accelerate the establishment of a mechanism of Asia-Pacific region. We hope to create such a pan-APEC mechanism. Recently, China has successfully convened the third BRF in Beijing, facilitating the creation of an open world by injecting new dynamism. Third, green development is paramount. We will accelerate the development of green transformation, including the mode of development transformation. We will reduce carbon emission, pollution, and so on. China proposes green agriculture and sustainable city programs. We hope to create a clean and stable APEC region. Fourth, universal development and benefits sharing principle. Only when we develop together is the so-called common development and real development. We will follow the pathway of the UN 2030 agenda so that development is shared worldwide. We welcome the participation of all parties in that cause to create a common community of development for all, so that everyone can benefit from modernization. China will continue to work together with APEC in this campaign with more technical cooperation. As to women's development, traditionally the Chinese people believe in the contribution made by women, and gender equity is our national strategy, and women did play a big role in our modernization drive, so we will try to plan out for better development of women. The Chinese-style modernization is facilitating our rejuvenation. This year marks the 45th anniversary of China's reform and opening up. We will pursue high-quality development and openness. The Chinese-style modernization could help to contribute the modernization of the world at large in this new era. And we will highlight more outcomes coming from APEC regional cooperation. China welcomes the 2024 APEC meeting. We hope that as the host, the 2024 APEC meeting could be facilitated, and APEC will be put on the right track of development, and common development and prosperity will be the key outcomes of the meeting. Thank you.
All right, that was President Xi Jinping speaking at the APEC meeting. And now let's bring in my colleague Xu Xinchen in San Francisco. Hello there, Xinchen. We've just heard President Xi Jinping's speech at the leaders' meeting. And over the week, he actually has delivered several speeches. How have these remarks been received?
Yes, Tony. So basically, if we look at this year's APEC Economic Leaders Meeting, is a whole week event, and I'll be speaking to high school teachers, high school students, as well as top business leaders and influential decision makers here in San Francisco, and they are actually reacting pretty positive to President Xi's remarks over the past few days. So there are a couple of key points from President Xi's remarks during the past few days. We need an open market in today's global economy, and we think about to break down the barriers for technological cooperation. And it's quite interesting, just from President Xi's remarks earlier that we just heard, he also brought up about women, gender equity. So before President Xi's trip to San Francisco, California Governor Gavin Newsom actually paid a visit to China, and President Xi told Newton that the foundation and hope for U.S.-China relations lies with the people, the future lies with the youth, and the vitality really aligns with subnational entities. And it comes back to President Xi's trip here in the United States, and a lot of remarks that he made kind of echoes back to that 3-4 sentences. And I'll be speaking to, for example, Sam Altman, the founder for OpenAI. He is very optimistic about the government talks that President Xi has brought up during his meeting with President Biden, the government talks on artificial intelligence, and that artificial intelligence talk that will further kind of build up the standards and regulations, so that experts believe, first, it will prevent the use of artificial intelligence in military, and other use of it can help other industries to build up its resilience. And also spoke with MasterCard International co-president Lin Hai, and he mentioned that, speaking of the theme for this year's APEC, one of the themes is resilience. So resilience means greater, robust economic growth, but also competition. As President Xi just said, that even though we need a competition to grow, to kind of maintain that resilience, but also we should, countries economies, leaders should have this mentality that to really hold zero discriminations towards cooperations, especially on technological cooperations. And speaking of people-to-people exchanges or women power, gender equality, I spoke to Lincoln High School assistant principals and the band teacher. They said they've been sending high school students to visit China often, and they saw the changes happening in those students, that they have better connection with the world, they start to understand humanity a little bit better. So if we look at this year's APEC, comes out a lot of pretty successful achievements. It's not just that we're seeing a thawing and a positive signs in improvement of China-U.S. relationships, but also that this cohort, the APEC economies, are really working together towards an open economy. Because if we look back 30 years ago, in Seattle, the U.S. was very keen to build up this open and a multilateral trade system, and here in 2023, we're facing a lot of geopolitical tensions, and we're having, recovery from COVID, but great outcomes from this APEC economic leaders week here in San Francisco that potentially will help the world to come back together. And of course, as President Xi said, APEC economies can also work with the world, the Global South or the Belt and Road Initiative, and so that it can achieve greater goods for better prosperity. Doni.
Right, and Xi Jinping, Chinese president, has also repeatedly assured the world that China will continue to open up. So that's the key messages he also sent to the world, how China's attitude works towards the world development. Thank you very much, Xu Xinchen, reporting from San Francisco. And now let's hand over to our studio in San Francisco for more discussion on Chinese President Xi Jinping's speech. Hello there, Mike.
Li Dongning, thanks so much. It was just a few years ago when I interviewed Parag Khanna, who wrote the book, The Future is Asian. And at the time he was talking about the Asian century. He said together the whole area represents 40% of the global economy. So we know APEC's very important. Xi Jinping talking about that, but how do we craft a new APEC moving forward? That was one of the central themes of this address. He had a lot to say, didn't he, on it?
He certainly did. You know, what we heard, Mike, in this very brief address to what's known as the APEC retreat, which is taking place right here where we are, what we heard was a reiteration of the major themes that the president has been talking about over the past few days. You know, he said in that speech, he said, we are at the frontier of opening and transformation, and he's talked about that earlier. He's talked about inclusiveness, more investment, opening up economies, getting more people involved, getting more people to work. He also acknowledged that the world economy, to be specific, is facing multiple risks right now, and he made that point earlier in his remarks before he talked with President Biden. He said that there are two conflicts taking place right now. It's impacting the entire world. Those are things that have to be addressed. He says APEC can play a bigger role in world economic development. I mean, he constantly went back to the theme of we need to form a community of APEC nations to push the economic agenda forward. He talked about actively encouraging technical exchange, development of AI. Mark will tell us more about that in a moment. Create new momentum to lower carbon. This is all about, climate change. It's of course one of the big agreements that was reached here at APEC with President Biden. They're on the same page as far as climate change is concerned. The other, of course, was military to military exchanges. He talked again in that address about green transformation. As well.
And gender equity, you also talked about that, yes, which Joe Biden brought up. Joe Biden, of course, giving the first address today, kind of setting the table, and then he, of course, he handed over to Dina Boluarte from Peru, who will take the stage next year. Biden also talked about AI, and it's interesting how he framed it versus Xi talking about the digital transformation, and Biden talking about the risks and the rewards of AI. Can you talk a little bit about what we're hearing here today?
I found it interesting that, point number one, on the multiple risks, President Xi cited, technical exchanges to create open, equitable technology communities. He cited AI, big data, and try to gain new momentum to move forward. In China, is the first country to have regulations on generative AI that they put out in August. Nobody else had done that. With the Biden administration, he went down in his talk a list of what they had done on October 30th, an executive order that they put in place, and he had more nuts and bolts of what they're doing as an example to try and give to everyone. Testing for companies that have to report with the most powerful tools that have to report to them. Privacy, making sure it's equitable again, that these AI algorithms are not discriminating. But it's not easy, and it's easier said than done, because I've talked to many companies where this data is trained on so many things that if you're going to take some of those things out of their algorithms, it could cost them millions and millions of dollars. So how they go about achieving that is going to be interesting, and their approaches to protecting privacy around the world.
It's a new frontier, there's no doubt about it. We're hearing that from a lot of leaders here, especially Xi Jinping. We're going to send it back to you, Li Dongning.
All right, thank you very much, Mike, and Mark as well, and Anand as well in San Francisco. And let's get back to our discussion in the studio with our two studio guests. Well, Aina, President Xi Jinping, during his short speech just now, he mentioned a lot of information. He stressed once again, of course, cooperation and share are key to the regional development to create a new and open and fair Asia-Pacific. He also mentioned the importance of, in particular, of women's position in society.
Yeah, I'm just going to give you my impressions, okay? I really like the speech. He set out a vision. It's about a shared future, and not just kind of in a general way. We need to share technology development. We need to bring women into the workplace. China has done that. But he not only shared this vision, but he also, was the adult in the room. And that is going to be the biggest takeaway from this. He was not distracted by anything that happened. He stuck to his vision, and he's talking about how you share things, how you can go forward. This is going to resonate with at least 20 of the countries there. At least 20. Okay, as will remark. Now, I talked earlier about WTO. He mentioned it in saying affirmatively, we're committed to the WTO. Well, there's only one country that's holding up the WTO, and that is the United States. So that was my prayer. I'm very, very short. I thought very powerful. He presented his vision, wasn't distracted, wasn't playing tit for tat, all right? And then he said, these are some things we should be thinking about.
Well, as the APEC meeting is wrapping up, last day, this is the last day of the meeting, Mr. Li, do you see very positive signals sent out from this meeting in terms of a global cooperation? Because the APEC member economies, members were watching the one-on-one meeting between Chinese and US presidents, but the whole world actually has been watching APEC meeting. Do you think any positive signals being sent out here?
Sure. I think most of the countries would recognize what our President Xi Jinping at the top has been talking about. For example, the technological cooperation, which is really important because that is related to the future economic transformation in the world. And if APEC member economies are going to do that, and we can expect positive spillover effect in the future, or almost immediately because of the immediate relations of those member economies with non-member economies, and opening up or openness. Openness is definitely the theme of the current global economy. Even though we have seen increasing anti-globalization, but I think most of the countries realize that openness is very important because no country can really develop by closing its own doors, and trying to force open the doors of other countries. That is not really the thing that they should do. And another thing I think that is very positive is the effort, APEC's effort, and that reflects the global effort as well. The green development, all right? So the reduction of CO2 non-CO2.
Right. China has been pursuing high-quality development, and that needs actually high-quality cooperation with other countries.
Yes, there's one other
Pacific
thing.
Rim.
One other thing, China has offered, examples, best practice of poverty reduction.
Right.
I think
That
in terms
China
of
has
women
been very
empowerment,
in
China has a lot of best practices to
and
share with the
experiences.
rest of the
Thank
world
you very
too.
much, gentlemen, Mr. Li Yong and Mr. Aine Tangen. Thank you very much for your input. And that's it for our special coverage of the APEC leaders meeting. I'm Li Dongning on behalf of teams in Beijing. Thank you for watching.